He newly disregarded it as just a hint and appeared harmless. He had to leave town for work, so he left Susan, his wife, with his customary comprehensive itinerary. She had also kept him fully apprised of her schedule, as was her custom after being together for so long. It was second nature. By 11 o'clock on Thursday morning, the parties he had been negotiating with signed the contract, and he was whisked away to handle a problem at one of their East Coast sites. The agreement had suddenly fallen into place. An upbeat, amiable guy who never stopped smiling, Early was the company's go-to negotiator and troubleshooter. While travels like this one weren't regular, they did arise multiple times a year for business. The planned conclusion of this week-long vacation fell on the past Saturday. His departure from Los Angeles was scheduled for around 9:15 p.m., and Susan was advised not to meet him at CCH Airport as his arrival in Seattle is expected after midnight. Instead, he planned to utilize the airport shuttle for his journey home, reaching his Bell residence by 1:30 a.m. Harley. He managed to exchange his plane tickets at Thex and boarded the jet by 1. He called Susan using the in-flight phone to inform her of his return later that afternoon, only to find out she was already at work. After retrieving her number from her briefcase, he proceeded to attempt to contact her at her place of employment. "How may I be of service to you?" Jensen, Sharon, and Anderson asked the receptionist who had welcomed him before anything else. Early wanted to know where Jennifer was. Jennifer worked as the personal secretary for Susan. Her desk was the frequent recipient of his calls. "Would you like me to assist you, Miss?" "Mrs. Conway's secretary is unavailable today and tomorrow," the bubbly receptionist replied. "Oh, well, can I speak to Mrs. Conway then?" "Miss Kono. She's, who can I tell her called?" responded a slightly agitated receptionist. "Please patch me through. This is her husband," he pleaded. "Oh, Mrs. Conroy is currently quite busy. I'm not sure when she will be available. Would it be okay if I left her a message?" After giving it some consideration, Early said, "No, I'll speak to her at home tonight. Just tell her." I called, and this ended the call. It took him half an hour more to figure out what was odd about the call. Before last night's phone call, Susan assured him that she would spend the entire day at the office. However, she might have been engrossed in a client or legal matter and unable to be distracted. Having Jennifer not be there was the true irritant. Jennifer was required by Susan to work the same hours as herself. When Early looked into it, the only instances when Jennifer was absent from the office during Susan's shift were when Susan was sick with the flu and the rare occasions when Jennifer was away from the workplace for personal reasons. The jet touched down in Seattle promptly at around 6:35 p.m. He was swiftly taken to his house. To his surprise, neither Susan nor the house were illuminated. Typically by 6 o'clock in the evening, his wife would have been home. Upon arriving home, he unpacked and placed his soiled clothes in the hamper, changing into fresh attire. Since Susan was not yet home by 8 o'clock, he prepared himself a grilled cheese sandwich for dinner. Sitting in front of the television, he anxiously awaited Susan's return, concerned that something might have happened to her on her way back from work. He began to worry, however. He reasoned that if there had been an accident, someone would have notified the residents. In the event that he wasn't there, a message would have been left. He couldn't sit still from thinking about Susan. He started pacing the floor. She was not available when he tried to reach her by cell phone. Probably, he considered, because the phone was turned off. I wonder why she would have turned it off. The suspicion that something was very wrong had intensified by the time his personal cell phone. At 9:20, he picked up the phone and discovered Susan on the other side. The first words that came out of her mouth were, "Early, I was beginning to wonder if something had gone wrong." She appeared anxious. "I called your hotel as usual after eating dinner, and they told me you had checked out. Are you all right?" "Yeah, actually, it's only a little shift in strategy," he said. "Where are you?" I'm home, just finished cleaning up the kitchen. It's been lonely around here tonight. Will you be home Sunday as scheduled? And where are you staying?" As he spoke into the early dark kitchen, he assured the caller that he would be available all day Sunday at his home. "Anything unusual come up today? I tried to get you at the office this afternoon." "Oh no, nothing out of the ordinary. I was probably involved with John sooner back then. He saved my bacon during the MEO account controversy this week. I owe him a huge depth of gratitude," she replied, her voice carrying an underlying connotation that Early failed to decipher. "Honey, after I was able to turn that disaster around, it looks like I'm going to get that partnership. Mr. Jensen practically promised it to me," Susan said. "Isn't that grand?" "Sure is, honey. We will have to celebrate. I'm sorry I wasn't there tonight to get the celebration off the ground. Don't worry about that, love. We can start our fiesta Sunday when you come home. Don't be late. I really miss you. It's going to be lonely in that big bed without you tonight." The connection was severed after a brief discussion on personal matters. There was a bitter taste in his mouth, and his stomach twisted and churned as Early sat there thinking about all the falsehoods Susan had told him tonight prior to this evening. He had the impression that his marriage and their love were solid. He had always accepted it without inquiry. He had doubts now, even though Susan had griped about the enormous spate. Early stayed up late, tossing and turning for hours before finally falling asleep. At 7:00 in the morning, he was wide awake and planning his day. While gazing at the ceiling, he realized Susan wasn't returning home. By 9:00, his phone rang at her office. He politely requested to speak with Mrs. Conroy. When the receptionist, rather than Jennifer, took up the phone, he thanked her for informing him that Miss Connor was unavailable, assured her that the matter was not urgent, and promised to call again on Monday morning. All that should work. By 9:00 on Monday, Miss Conroy should be in the office. "You can give her a call then," was the cordial reply. Early got in their SUV after retrieving contact information from his wife's workplace Rolodex. Only on excursions into the Cascade Mountains or when pulling their camping trailer did they use the dark green Explorer. They had bought the hitch. Those familiar with the vehicle had no idea what it was. He left the Mercedes in the garage and headed to Susan's office in Bell, making sure Susan's gray BMW wasn't in the lot. He drove slowly through it. It was with a heavy heart that he sought out the address John Sticker's home that he had seen on her Rolodex in the upscale MAA region. He discovered it in a wooded area. An 8-foot red brick fence encircled the property, and tall fir trees cast heavy shadows. As he slowly passed by, he noticed Susan's BMW parked beside the garage, tucked away from the circular driveway. He pulled over to the roadside as his vision blurred, taking a moment to compose himself and wipe his eyes. Breakfast had been delayed so much that it resembled brunch by the time he reached Bell for a quick pit stop. Seating himself by 11:30, he ordered tea and a Belgian waffle, uncertain if he could stomach it and opting to avoid coffee due to his unsettled stomach. With careful deliberation, he finished each bite, settled the bill, and left the restaurant an hour later. Returning to the road past Sticker's property, he drove slowly, noticing Susan's car still parked there. After aimlessly driving for over an hour, he passed Sticker's again, finding no change with his wife's vehicle. Anger and despair consumed him as he drove home, leaving him to ponder what had become of his marriage and the life. He had once loved. Can he ever smile again? He pondered, drifting around the home to cut the rest of the day. He would rather eat snacks, fruit drinks, and colas to numb the out-hunger sensations than cook dinner. At 9:45, just as he was getting ready for bed, he received another call from Susan on his cell phone, which was the only break. Once again she griped about the spaciousness and loneliness of their bed in his absence. While attempting to sound non-confrontational, Early grumbled and told her that she had no idea how lonely a bed that huge might be. So confused was Susan that she had to know what he meant. He dismissed the remark as an acknowledgment that she was quite lonely in her bed by herself. Just as he hung up, he confessed to loving her more than his own life. At midnight, he dragged himself into bed. He couldn't help but wonder if she loved him deeply. Was there something she was attempting to get him to do? It was inherently about her, not him. Why did it go wrong then? What was missing? Is he able to supply it? Is there anything he could do to fix it? Even after another restless night, he woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning, still not refreshed. Hearing Susan's BMW pull into the garage, Early sat in the living room with the shades drawn on and the lights off. Nearly 10 o'clock had passed. She entered the kitchen a little while later from the garage, a little bag for the night. He saw her enter while seated in his large, dark leather loom chair. A sleeveless red blouse and a camel-plaited wrapper and skirt were her attire. The silk blouse had 2 open buttons at the top. Her slim neck shimmered with her thigh clews and necklace, a present from him on their 3rd anniversary. She appeared revitalized and at ease as she made her way around the kitchen. As she approached the kitchen sink, she froze in her tracks, fixated on the chaos there. Not only had Early neglected to wash his breakfast dishes, but he'd also neglected to put the soiled glasses from the previous night in the dishwasher. Susan was also aware of the teapot that was warming water on the stove. With apprehension, Susan's gaze started to wander nervously across the room. She moved slowly and carefully, her only source of illumination being the faint light filtering through the drawn drapes in the dining room. She paused to examine the closed drapes that framed the patio sliding glass doors before making her way through the room. She made sure to check every corner, creeping silently from the living room to the fireplace. After setting her overnight bag on a chair in the dining room, she hefted the poker. She spun around to face the room once more. At that moment, Early drew her attention to his enigmatic presence as he leaned back in his chair and took a sip of tea. "Oh my goodness, you scared me. When did you get back home?" Susan's voice trembled with concern. There was a tense silence before he replied, the moment stretching out as if time had slowed down. "Just a couple of days," he answered, his usually lively tone drained of energy. Susan sank into the wingback chair opposite him, the blurred white stripes blurring as her knees weakened. She was stunned into stillness. "Why didn't you let me know? Why didn't you call? Where have you been staying?" She fired off questions, her emotions running high. "I tried calling on Thursday afternoon. You weren't home, and you weren't at the office. Jennifer wasn't there either," he responded, his voice heavy with emotion. He continued to sip his tea, letting the silence hang in the air before adding, "I was right here when you called, spent the night in that big empty bed you always talked about." Outside, the sun of Sunday warmed the pavement upon the distant sound of children's voices carried on the breeze, a stark contrast to the tension inside. The barking of one of their dogs filled the air as night fell. The living room's blinds and drapes were drawn back. Aside from Susan's choked cries, there were no other sounds. "Did you want to tell me about it, Susan? Can you make me understand what happened?" Early continued in his same lifeless, flat voice as he took another sip of tea. "Somehow I don't think the bed you were in Thursday and Friday nights was all that lonely." With her head trembling in her hands, covering her face, Susan was now openly crying. "Early, I love you. This had nothing to do with you, with us. Please try to understand. This was something I felt I had to do. It had nothing to do with my love for you, with us," she pleaded. Sipping his tea in silence, Early watched his wife till he got up to stock his cup. He approached Susan from the kitchen and asked if she needed anything. Ignoring him, she shook her head in disapproval. She also turned a blind eye as he sat back down. "Well, wife, tell me why you felt what you owed Sticker that warranted breaking your wedding vows to me." "Oh no, he wouldn't do anything like that. He's a very honorable man. What he did was only because he wanted to help me, and he knew." I wasn't responsible for the mess things were in. He would never ask for something like that. He didn't expect to get anything from it, so since he wouldn't ask, was too honorable to even suggest you break your vows. Why did you volunteer? Is that what I'm hearing? What am I missing? You were making this all sound so torty. It wasn't like that. It was something you deserved. I keep telling you it had nothing to do with you and I, with us. Susan insisted, nearly yelling. Is it something I've done, some problem with me that led to this? Susan was nearly yelling. No, I keep telling you it had nothing to do with you. I had to do something to thank him for what he did for me when he helped me with Mose. He did it for both you and me. His help will benefit both of us. This wasn't for me, it was for him, and it had nothing to do with my love for you. Since you are so upset that my description of your tryst sounds toddy and slimy, does this mean it was beautiful to you? He asked slowly and painfully after a moment of consideration. Once more, the hush was broken by Early. Remember, Susan, how I've always promised you that I'm yours, and you've always assured me that you're mine. You've told me that many times, usually without my asking. Do you remember when I told you that I thought we belonged together? Do you remember that? Early's voice came out emotionlessly, but Susan could feel the quiver in his words. Early, yes, I do belong to you. This had nothing to do with you, nothing to do with us, Susan replied. Oh, Susan, how can you say one thing, then another? So contradictory. Can't you see the contradiction? You gave the one thing that was most important to me, the one thing in the whole world that I felt most proud of yourself. You gave it to another man. And sitting here, listening to you talk, I am beginning to believe you hold intimacy with yourself of little value. You gave it to a man you say hadn't even asked for it. To hear you talk. I am beginning to think you had to beg him to take it. Then you make it sound like it was completely unrelated to me, he murmured with a hint of despair. But it didn't mean anything Early. I am still all here. Nothing in me has changed. I love you totally. I am yours. Susan C. Everything we go through shapes us. You had a brief stint in another man's bed. Early paused, his voice quivering as he spoke to Susan. You were doing things, intimate things, with another man, things that should only be shared with someone you love, he questioned with Theop. How many nights were you with him, Susan? Was it only those two? How many more were there? After regaining his emotional composure, he spoke again, breaking a long silence. His words were once again devoid of any emotion. And yet, Susan, I can't help but wonder how many other men are deserving of what rightfully belongs to me. You tell me your mind, and then you give yourself away so easily. Susan shook her head in denial at Early's words. Her body trembling with sobs, slumping her shoulders, she crossed her arms over her face, her knees drawing up, and her hair falling forward to conceal her features. She seemed to shrink into herself as the hour ticked by. The man sat in silent contemplation in his chair, while his wife remained hidden in the chair opposite him. The only sounds were those emanating from the outside world, where the neighborhood was basking in the sunshine and enjoying a peaceful afternoon. Up until the muted noon strike of the mantel clock, the only sound emanating from the room was Susan's weeping. Susan, I don't know where we are going. I swear I love you as much now as I did Sunday as I was leaving for Los Angeles, but I don't know where we are. You keep telling me that your betrayal has nothing to do with me. You don't understand what you have done. My trust in you is gone, and I don't know how I can get it back, what you could do to earn it back. After a while, he went on, if you suggest I go out and cheat on you, that would balance the scales. We are through first. If you have so little interest in my fidelity, it tells me how cheap you hold fidelity. Second, 2 wrongs do not make a right. 2 wrongs are twice as bad as one. Gradually, he stood up from his seat, placed the empty teacup on the hearth of the fireplace, and made his way to the dining room. He pulled back the shades to see their sunny, spotless backyard. His voice became so low that she had to strain to make out what he was saying. Susan, I want to shake you. Shake you so hard your teeth rattle. I have never wanted to hurt a woman before, much less my wife, my love. It would be a very bad idea if I were to meet John Snar now, despite your implication that it was you that seduced him." Susan made a slight noise, possibly denying that. She caught John's attention. He went on, "Maybe he won't think you're available for anyone but him, but he will believe you are available to him. To him, you are easy. Over time, he is going to lose a lot of respect and value for you. If we want somehow to make this marriage work, we are going to have to face this hour by hour, day to day, week by week in this house as we try to reopen communication." He continued with a deep breath, almost whispering, "I don't know if it can be done. I do know we can make no decisions today. It will be months, maybe years before we can again be truly comfortable with one another. For tonight, I'll sleep in the guest room. Tomorrow we will replace our king-size bed with a full-size bed for each of us. The master bedroom is large enough. Somehow, if we work hard at it, we may be able to get through this if we both want to make it work. At the moment, I wonder if you do. For now, this is the best I can do." After gazing out into their sunny backyard, turning around to return to the living room was like peering into a gloomy cave. "Unwilling to try, we can talk about what marriage means to each of us over the coming months. Maybe we can save this, Susan. I love you." He stepped outside after sliding open the glass doors leading to the terrace. His wife's cries rang out as he